TPN, the Sovereign Americans News Network. 9/11 terror trials are being used as another political weapon of terror against American citizens.
Hello, I'm Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. The Obama administration's decision to prosecute the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 4 other co-conspirators in civilian court in New York City makes no sense to most Americans, including me. And now is not the time to go back to the pre-9/11 mentality of fighting crime instead of fighting a war on terror. These al-Qaeda terrorists are not common criminals. Their attacks resulted in the biggest loss of American life from an act of war on our homelands. A civilian trial of hardcore terrorists is unnecessarily dangerous and creates more problems than it solves. Civilian trials create confusion. And is reading Miranda rights to terrorists any way to fight a war? Case in point, the Christmas Day bomber. Finally, a civilian trial in New York City will be expensive. The New York City Police Commissioner, Mayor, and other leaders have all expressed concern these trials could last for years and end up costing over $1 billion.
There are many well-founded arguments on both sides of the issue, but the bottom line remains this. All of those quote-unquote terrorists are nothing more than common criminals who have organized themselves in the same fashion as the mob or other gang-like groups have in the past. Persons from these types of groups have always faced civil criminal courts for the crimes they have committed, and in fact almost daily we are in the process of extraditing some non-American from some foreign land back to the U.S. to face U.S. civilian criminal court for the crime they are accused of committing. Elevating these common trash thug criminals to the status of soldiers spits in the face of all the honorable men and women of good conscience who choose to put on this country's many military uniforms, for which we honor with the title of soldier, reserving all respect and customary allowances for them and other real soldiers of a real war alone. Arguing from the extremes of the sides is exactly what is desired by the forces focused on eliminating individual sovereignty want us to do. By converting criminal activity into those acts of war in the mainstream mentality, they provide the perfect setup to eliminate inalienable rights. For as a terrorist, one could no longer be expected to get a fair trial, as would a criminal. As a terrorist, one can be convicted with the label alone. Anyone who thinks for 1 second that this would not quickly morph into American citizens being brought into this category should study history a lot better. For if we allow these forces to eliminate the standard of law that we have used for our entire existence, then we should expect no less than the loss of that same existence. One just needs to look around and see how those little nuggets have been dropped lately in all of the mainstream news media. Specifically, the one we have noticed a lot lately is, the terrorists are here and among us. And what exactly does that mean? It means that they want to control you more and more, invade your privacy, your rights, your freedoms, whenever, wherever they like. They are using the fear of mass terrorist, quote, acts of war, unquote, that will harm more and more people, and thusly, these same forces are the ones behind the calls for more restricted freedoms, the Patriot Act being the #1 most obvious example. But it didn't end there. In 2007, well after the Unpatriot Act was passed, they tried to go one giant leap further with H.R. 1955 and S.R. 1959, which sought to turn dissident speech into a category of terrorism. Once again, they are using fear to try and shift the paradigm. The fear of security and soapbox speeches by these clearly insane criminals are what they are using now. Sadly, they have enlisted some of the emotion-laden 9/11 families in their nefarious plot, some of whom are too emotionally attached to see through the plot to eliminate personal freedoms, and who are solely caught up in the whipped-up emotions of the moment and the rhetoric of those who stand to gain from it. Surely New Yorkers aren't the peeps that everyone wants us to believe that they are, with this whipped-up fear of a trial, are they? All of this talk about being a target if a trial is held, the inconvenience to New Yorkers, the cost, the safety, the this, the that. To quote John Stossel, give me a break. And now, too, with the underwear bomber. Oh no, we can't try to convict him in a civilian court, for that means we can't waterboard him, and he may be found not guilty. Please, One just has to look at his burned-up groin or to ask the dozens of passengers who saw the whole thing to get the proof one needs to convict, and the info he did give up to know the system as is works. People, we need to look long and hard at the manipulation that is taking place, or else we could fall into President Obama's category of, quote, unlawful enemy combatants, unquote, and subject to his made-up law of
prolonged detention.
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes, in some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes. After condemning the Bush administration for what he called their ad hoc legal strategy for trying to make things seem legal that patently weren't, this is what President Obama proposed.
My administration has begun to reshape the standards that apply to ensure that they are in line with the rule of law. We must have clear, defensible, and lawful standards for those who fall into this category. Our goal is to construct a legitimate legal framework. Our goal is not to avoid a legitimate legal framework. In our constitutional system, prolonged detention should not be the decision of any one man. If and when we determine that the United States must hold individuals, we will do so within a system that involves judicial and congressional oversight. And so going forward, my administration will work with Congress to develop an appropriate legal regime so that our efforts are consistent with our values and our Constitution.
You'll construct a legal regime to make indefinite detention legal. So you can construct a whole new system outside the courts, even outside the military commissions, so that you can indefinitely imprison people without charges. And you'll build that system from scratch. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning." And it is stunning, particularly to hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment. How can a president speak the kind of poetry that President Obama does about the rule of law and call for the power to indefinitely, preventively imprison people because they might commit crimes in the future?
That we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemism. How long would President Obama's proposed preventive indefinite detention last? Well, he's not saying yet, but here's how he defines the threat that he says makes indefinite detention necessary.
Right now, in distant training camps and in crowded cities, there are people plotting to take American lives. That will be the case a year from now, 5 years from now, and in all probability 10 years from now.
10 years from now. So you could get arrested today and locked up without a trial, without being convicted, without being sentenced for, say, 10 years until the threat of your future criminal behavior passes. Prolonged detention, he's calling it. This is one of the most radical proposals for defying the Constitution that we have ever heard made to the American people.
And one of the best examples of good cop, bad cop that has never been more obvious, yet so ignored. And if they get their way and finally pass a bill similar to H.R. 1955 or S.R. 1959, preventative detention will be your fate just for speaking out for or against any issues. So enough with this anti-American fear-mongering and onward with the unparalleled American justice, which has convicted more than 24 of these so-called terrorists already, with no harm to civilians, we might add. And lastly, we would remind all American citizens, and especially to those beeps of New York who are solely afraid of the problems of a criminal trial could produce, of Ben Franklin's warning, quote, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. TPN, the Sovereign Americans News Network.